at the time, not even remotely chronicled. Hence why we're reading the book of Daniel to understand Revelation and the end of time. So it's important to understand the who's and the what's and the why's and the where's and the how's. So I wanted to do a history survey of the relationships between specifically the two main players, kingdom entities that we're going to see in the book of Daniel, which is going to be Judah and Babylon. In order to do Judah and Babylon, you really have to do Assyria. So we're going to have a brief, it's not going to be brief, we're going to have a rundown of the Assyrian Empire and its various encounters with Judah and with Babylon. And my hope is that in going through this, when we do get to Daniel, some things that appear euphemistic in the book of Daniel, it will be clearer the nature of what's going on and what the political situation is for Daniel and his fellow captives after Judah has been taken by Babylon. So the slideshow doesn't have all the information. I promise I don't expect y'all to just read it. And I promise I'm not just going to read off of it. But I did want to have some visuals. We're going to see this slide a lot. I'm going to go to other things and come back to this slide. So you're going to see this slide a lot. The map in this slide, every time we're on this slide with the timeline, this map is approximately circa 700 BC. I'm about to show you a map that's a bit earlier than that, and then there's some other maps. Just know, if you get confused and think, why did the map change? This map, this slide, is approximately 700 BC. So, to start, the beginning of the story starts with the fly in my coffee. And the second part of the story is 2600 BC, which is the rise of Assyria.
Can I ask a question before?
No.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Now, I think that we have history in the Bible history back to like 4000 BC.
Well,
It's a deep conversation.
Okay. Well, we can move on.
We have in the beginning, which is in the beginning.
Yeah.
yeah. So as we're gonna briefly talk about here, the Bible. Not to say anything in the Bible is untrue per se, but the Bible is a terrible history book because you've got about 50% of the Bible talking about the same 300 years in a circular way, and then you get to the end of the Bible and it's still talking about the same 300 years. And everything that was written about those 300 years was written before everything that was written 4,000 years ago.
Okay.
So the Bible's a terrible history book,
Okay.
which is why we're going to do it this way.
Mm-hmm.
And to answer your question as to where the Bible history starts, like Dad said, in the beginning, that's where it starts.
Okay.
Don't ask me for more information than that, because
Okay.
we could spend years on that one.
According to the Jewish calendar, it's somewhere around 8,000 years.
Okay.
I mean, you can track chronologically the birth of Adam, and then his lineage, then through Noah, then his lineage, then Moses, then his lineage, then King David, then his lineage, all the way to Christ. You can track, and it's 6,800 years or something like that.
Something like that. But then you're also getting into the world of like people living 900 years and weird stuff. So
Yeah, there's people who have done this study that you're talking about, Dad, and biblically the timeline's somewhere less than 7,000 years.
yeah, the Bible does not agree with itself in places. As a history book, as a history book, the Bible does not agree with itself, and there's a point where I'm gonna actually point that out. And
Yeah.
but
We can move. Let's move on.
And also some of this I'm gonna cover some of the stuff that was in that podcast I sent to all of you. I know you listened to it, David. Or Andy, you listened. I'm not sure, David, if you got to listen.
I haven't yet, but
Sent a podcast by a guy named Dan Carlin. Dan Carlin is not a historian. He's a journalist, actually. I'm a big fan of him. He's a classical liberal. So, not a leftist, but a big, small government guy. But not a conservative. So, I'm a really big fan of him. He has a political podcast, but he also has a history podcast. But he talks history as a journalist, which is and he actually uses this phrase in the podcast I sent out. He's not relaying, he's not just relaying the facts. He's relaying the facts in the most compelling way. So he has a really good job of doing the flavor of what I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to quite do him justice, but I am going to cover some more details that he missed about what we want to focus on specifically, which is going to be Assyria and its relationship with Judah and Babylon. So 2600 BC, the rise of Assyria. In 930 BC, Judah and Israel split. So the kingdom of Israel, Saul, David, and Solomon, was, many biblical scholars think, pretty much always a slightly divided kingdom. You had the more settled people of Jerusalem in the south and the more nomadic tribal people of Samaria in the north. In 930 BC, after disagreeing over who is going to be the new king, the northern tribes essentially say, we're out, you do your kingdom, we're not going to fight you, but we're out, just let us do our thing. And that's what happens. So that northern kingdom is known as Israel or Samaria later in the Bible, and Judah is the southern kingdom. So when we say Israel now, we're actually not talking about Jerusalem. We're talking about people north of Jerusalem. Jerusalem lays in Judah. In the early 720s BC, the timeline is a little bit unclear because, again, these people were nomadic, tribal people. Assyria conquers Samaria. The precise date is unknown. Let me back up just a moment. 1 Kings 12, we're not going to read all of it because it's pretty much the whole chapter, but if you want to know about that split between Samaria and Judah, 1 Kings 12 is where you want to go. But for the early 720s BC, Assyria conquers Samaria, and the precise date is sort of unknown. But when Assyria conquers the Samaritans, the Assyrian Empire scatters the people. They deport them. Usually when we say deport in the Bible, they're being enslaved. Slavery worked a little bit differently in the old world than the modern world. Children born slaves were not necessarily slaves. Slaves had more freedom than what we think of, where they, in American history, were like straight up property. But usually in the Bible, when we talk about deportations or people being scattered or diaspora, it's enslavement. So in the 720s, Assyria enslaves the northern Samaritans. And that happens in 1 Chronicles 5, verses 25 and 26. If anyone gets to it before me, please feel free to just start reading.
5 what? 1 Chronicles 5 what?
25 and 26.
And they transgressed against the God of their fathers and went a whoring after the gods of the people of the land whom God destroyed before them. And the God of Israel stirred up the spirit of Pul, king of Assyria, Pul, Pul, king of Assyria, and the spirit of Tilgath-Pilneser, king of Assyria. So there's two kings of Assyria that were mentioned here. And God stirred up the spirit, okay? And he carried them away, even the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and brought them unto Halah and Habor and Harah and to the river of Gozan unto this day.
All right, there we go. So, you get the idea. So in 722 BC, so very shortly thereafter, we heard about the Assyrian king Pul. In 722 BC, the Assyrians kept very good records. Paul dies and his son Sargon II ascends the Assyrian throne. That same year, a Chaldean named Marduk-Baladan seizes the Babylonian throne from the Assyrian Empire. So the Assyrian Empire had this, culturally they were very similar to Babylonians. So you've got the empire, within the empire you have kingdoms. Throughout Assyrian history, they'll play around with letting the Babylonians have their own king versus the emperor being king. And in 722, Marduk-Baladan claims the throne of Babylon and declares his independence from the Assyrian Empire. Sargon II, understandably, he's not in a great mood about this, and so he will actually along with his father, deport 27,000 Israelites. And that's where we get the lost tribes of Israel, as they were kicked out of the Holy Land. A little map note here. Assyria, basically modern day Syria, right here just below Turkey. Babylon is modern day Iraq, and the Chaldean people live there, and you can see them right here on the Persian Gulf. Judah on the Mediterranean coast, right here. So as we talk about it, when we talk about the Assyrians moving east or the Assyrians moving south, generally they're going to beat up on the Chaldeans, on the Babylonians. But sometimes in their move south, depending on where the armies are intersecting, they're going to run into Judah as well. In so doing, we can assume that in going to fight the Babylonians, the Assyrian armies went somewhere along this route, scattered the tribes of Israel, and made Judah, the more settled Israelite people, made them a client state or a vassal state in the year 722 BC. So that means that Judah, from henceforth, not necessarily ruled by Assyria, but Assyria's made it clear, hey, not in my backyard, you pay me my protection money and don't act up.
So Judah was considered one tribe, and the other 11 tribes were the lost tribes?
So the Levites were a priestly tribe, and so they were not necessarily considered a people. They were the priestly class. They were the Sadducees, or Pharisees as they would later be called. Those were the Levites. And so you kind of had, among the 11 other tribes, you had the Levites mixed in. So
Who occupied Judah?
The Judahs? The tribe of Judah?
The tribe of Judah. Okay.
The tribe of Judah would occupy Judah, and there would be Levites mixed in.
Okay, that's what.
And then the other 10 tribes, 10, not Levi and Judah, were more nomadic tribal people, and they had Levites mixed in as well. So the Levites never really have a home because they are the priestly class. So every tribe needs their Levites.
I got you.
So there are 10 lost tribes of Israel.
I see.
Lost tribes. So in 715 BC, though they are a vassal state of, and I'm going to go. This is about approximately 700 BC where the map lays. So in 715 BC, though they are a vassal state of Assyria, King Hezekiah of Judah allies militarily with Egypt, while Assyria is distracted beating up on the Babylonians. And in 710 BC, Sargon II, who had deported the 27,000 Israelites, he retakes Babylon. Babylon declaring independence, getting beat up, you're going to get sick of hearing about it. And it gets nastier each time. 705 BC, while putting down a relatively minor rebellion in Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey, Sargon II is killed and his body is left unrecovered on the battlefield. In the Assyrian culture, really in any culture, if your leader gets killed and you got whooped so bad that you can't even recover their body, it's a bad sign, right? I mean, your entire force has been driven from the battlefield at that point. Additionally, in Assyrian culture, he was considered cursed by their god Asher. Cursed that Asher would allow that to happen, and cursed again that their people did not try to rectify the situation. So Sargon number 2 is cursed number 2, and it's really just not a good look. The Assyrian Empire panics a little bit. Sennacherib, the son of Sargon, ascends the throne in the wake of Sargon's disastrous defeat. And while Assyria is panicking, Hezekiah, who, remember, 10 years ago has allied with Egypt, stops paying tribute to Assyria. In 70...
That's not
question?
good.
No. In 704, due to this panic that's been created, Sennacherib, he's trying to kind of distance himself from his father, though the record actually really indicates that, and this is just kind of an aside, but Sennacherib seems to have been actually completely tore up. You have a lot of stories of brothers murdering brothers, sons murdering fathers. Sennacherib seems to have taken a complete emotional just devastation at what has happened to his dad, but he can't show it because his dad is considered cursed and has cursed their whole people by dying in such a dishonorable way. And so the political and cultural games that Sennacherib will play for the next couple of years are interesting, and it takes him a while to kind of get things up and running after the death of his father Sargon. So in 704 BC, after kind of consolidating his power and sending a revenge army up to kick the butts of the Anatolians who had recently killed his dad, but then not celebrating it because, again, it's this weird, he seems to be really tore up, but he doesn't want to publicly connect himself to his dad. But he sends his armies to beat up on the Anatolians, and while his armies go north, because, as we see in the map, his armies have gone from here to here, the Babylonians, again, they start acting up. And so after a series of revolts, Marduk-Baladan once again is sitting on the throne of Babylon. And this is, again, not a good look for Sennacherib, whose father had just kicked Marduk-Baladan out. Marduk, by the way, and we'll get to this a little bit more later, but Marduk is the name of the chief Babylonian god. Asher is the name of the chief Assyrian god. But both the Chaldeans and the Assyrians, and remember Chaldeans and Babylonians are the same, they had the same pantheon. It was really just a matter of which god got more emphasis. But once again, Marduk-Baladan is sitting on the throne of Babylon, and so Sennacherib brings his armies south in 703 BC and goes to retake Babylon. In 702, the Assyrian armies defeat the Babylonian army in the field. They never siege Babylon because Babylon surrenders without a fight once their army's been destroyed. Sennacherib installs a native Babylonian who had been raised in the Assyrian court. So remember, Babylon had already revolted. They had already gone and put down a revolt. At that time, they took captives of Babylonian children. And they brought those Babylonian children back to Assyria, and they raised those children. And they weren't cruel to them. They were actually pretty nice to them. But that was their contingency, because now these children, who for the past 13 years have been raised as Assyrian children, are now placed on the throne of Babylon. The Babylonians presumably won't revolt against one of their own, and the Assyrians presumably have one of their own on the throne.
But
Everybody's
they're kids,
happy.
And they've been raised in Assyria, so they have no Babylonian culture, the language, the food, the gods, everything is Assyrian.
Correct. Now remember, the Assyrian and Babylonian culture is similar, but Sennacherib makes it really clear. This is the other neat thing about Assyrian records, is everything is written as if the ruler himself said it. It might have been one of his scribes, but it's more fun to imagine that the emperor said this. So Sennacherib said of his new Babylonian puppet that he had installed a native of Babylon who grew up in my palace like a young puppy. In 701 BC, with Babylon handled, Sennacherib turns west to collect from Judah 4 years of missed payments. And in 2 Kings 18, 14 through 16, we hear or read the story of what happens. So there's some conflicting accounts here between the historical record and what's written in Chronicles and what's written in 2 Kings. But I'll read here in 2 Kings 18, verses 14 through 16, as the Assyrian army has come to collect from Judah. And Hezekiah, I'm reading now, Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent to the king of Assyria, to Lachish, saying, I have offended. Return from me. That which thou puttest on me will I bear. And the king of Assyria appointed unto Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. And Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasures of the king's house. At that time did Hezekiah cut off the gold from the doors of the temple of the Lord and from the pillars which Hezekiah king of Judah had overlaid, and gave it to the king of Assyria. Now, in 2 Kings, let me make sure I've got the right verse here. Yes, so in 2 Kings 18, continuing in verses 17 through 25, we see that Rabshakeh, an Assyrian envoy, is sent to Jerusalem to encourage the people to revolt against Hezekiah after he has just made this payment. And Rabshakeh will say, well, Hezekiah has lost God's favor. He just sold your God out to my king. So who do you think has God's favor now, my king or the guy who just sold him out? And so in 2 Kings 17 through 25, and the king of Assyria sent Tartan and Rabsaris and Rabshakeh from Lachish to King Hezekiah with a great host against Jerusalem. And they went up and came to Jerusalem, and when they were come up, they came and stood by the conduit of the upper pool, which is in the highway of the fuller's field. And when they had called to the king, there came out to them Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, which was over the household, and Shebna the scribe, and Joah the son of Asaph the recorder. And Rabshakeh said to them, Speak ye now to Hezekiah, Thus saith the great king, the king of Assyria, What confidence is this wherein thou trustest? Thou sayest, and they are but vain words, I have counsel and strength for the war. Now on whom dost thou trust, that thou rebellest against me? Now behold, thou trustest upon the staff of this bruised reed, even upon Egypt, remember the military alliance, on which if a man lean, it will go into his hand and pierce it. So is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, unto all that trust him. But if ye say unto me, We trust in the Lord our God, is not that he, whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah hath taken away, and hath said to Judah and Jerusalem, Ye shall worship before this altar in Jerusalem? Now therefore I pray thee, give pledges to my lord, the king of Assyria, and I will deliver thee 2,000 horses, if thou be able on thy part to set riders upon them. How then wilt thou turn away the face of one captain of the least of my master's servants, and put thy trust on Egypt for chariots and for horsemen? Am I now come up without the Lord against this place to destroy it? The Lord said to me, Go up against this land and destroy it. So basically the Assyrian envoy has said, Look, your king just sold your God out. My king is greater than your king, and your God is on my king's side. That's basically what just happened. Fast forwarding now a little bit, because obviously the Jerusalem natives, they don't want to bow down to the Assyrian king. So we're going to jump to 2 Kings 19, verses 14 through 36. And at this point, God sends a message to Hezekiah, and basically says, look, Israel's going to get through this. You sold me out. I get it. You were trying to keep my people alive. I get it. Don't sell me out again. Jerusalem's going to get through this. So if someone could read 2 Kings 19, verses 14 through 36, and I need to take a voice break.
14 through 36.
Yes, please.
You did pretty amazing with the pronunciation of all these crazy names. But and Hezekiah received the letter of the hand of the messengers and read it. And Hezekiah went up to the house of the Lord and spread it before the Lord. And Hezekiah prayed before the Lord and said, O Lord God of Israel, which dwellest between the cherubims, thou art the God, even thou alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. Thou hast made heaven and earth. Lord, bow down thine ear and hear. Open, Lord, thine eyes and see, and hear the words of Sennacherib, which hath sent him to reproach the living God. Of a truth, Lord, the kings of Assyria have destroyed the nations in their lands, and have cast their gods into the fire. For they were no gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore they have destroyed them. Now therefore, O Lord our God, I beseech thee, save thou us out of his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that thou art the Lord God, even thou only. Then Isaiah the son of Amoz sent to Hezekiah, saying, Thus saith the Lord of God of Israel, that which thou hast prayed to me against Sennacherib king of Assyria, I have heard. This is the word that the Lord hath spoken concerning him. The virgin, the daughter of Zion, hath despised thee, and laughed thee to scorn. The daughter of Jerusalem hath shaken her head at thee. Whom hast thou reproached and blasphemed? And against whom hast thou exalted thy voice and lifted up thine eyes on high? Even against the Holy One of Israel. By the messengers thou hast reproached the Lord, and hast said, with the multitude of my chariots I am come to the height of the mountains, to the sides of Lebanon, and will cut down the tall cedar trees thereof, and the choice fir trees thereof, and I will enter into the lodgings of his borders, and into the forest of his Carmel. I have digged and drunk strange waters, and with the sole of my feet I have dried up all the rivers of besieged places. Hast thou not heard long ago how I have done it, and of ancient times that I have formed it? Now have I brought it to pass that thou shouldest be to lay waste fenced cities into ruinous heaps. Therefore their inhabitants were of small power. They were dismayed and confounded. They were as the grass of the field, and as the green herb, as the grass on the housetops, and as corn blasted before it be grown up. But I know thy abode, and thy going out, and thy coming in, and thy rage against me. Because thy rage against me and thy tumult is come up into mine ears. Therefore I will put my hook in thy nose, and my bridle in thy lips, and I will turn thee back by the way by which thou camest. And this shall be a sign unto thee: ye shall eat this year such things as grow of themselves, and in the second year that which springeth of the same, and in the third year sow ye and reap and plant vineyards, and eat the fruits thereof. And the remnant that is escaped of the house of Judah shall yet again take root downward, and bear fruit upward. For out of Jerusalem shall go forth a remnant, and they that escape out of Mount Zion, the zeal of the Lord of hosts shall do this. Therefore thus saith the Lord concerning the king of Assyria: he shall not come into this city, nor shoot an arrow there, nor come before it with shield, nor cast a bank against it. By the way that he came, by the same shall he return, and shall not come into this city, saith the Lord. For I will defend this city to save it, for mine own sake, and for my servant David's sake. And it came to pass that night that the angel of the Lord went out and smote in the camp of Assyrians 185,000. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went and returned and dwelt at Nineveh.
Thank you. So,
Good reading.
for those who are not good at the score, and thank you for giving me a voice break.
Yeah.
The 7 years ago and all that. The number's 185,000.
Wow.
And that matches the Assyrian records of how many were killed. Of course, the Assyrian records, they just make it seem like they were pillaging in the countryside, and some people got sick, and it just didn't work out, and it wasn't worth it. And Hezekiah had already paid up, so we just went home. That's kind of how the Assyrian records play it, but the number of dead is the same. Now, one thing that I find really interesting, and this is just a little side note. So centuries later, that story that we just read, that was about 701 BC. So somewhere around 300 BC, Herodotus, the Greek, he's known as the father of history. We get the 300 Spartans fighting back the Persian Empire in the approximately 430s BC. That comes from Herodotus of Halicarnassus. He was actually he was a Greek living in modern day Turkey after Alexander's conquest. A lot of Alexander's history comes from Herodotus, but Herodotus would write in approximately 300-ish BC as he was then now telling the story of the Middle East to Europeans and kind of recording history as a European for the first time, that the Assyrian army on its march to Egypt was turned back about halfway by a plague of rats that destroyed them. Herodotus has never heard of Jews. So I just found that very interesting.
I love how it says the angel of the Lord killed the 185,000. The angel of the Lord smote the camp of Assyria.
Yeah, and all historical records, again, not just the Bible, they basically agree that, well over 100,000, probably closer to 200,000 Assyrian soldiers were killed by some sort of plague or pestilence in a relatively short period of time in the area surrounding Jerusalem. In the Bible story, it's all one night as they're camped outside the walls. In the official Assyrian records, it's in their country over the course of 6 months, and in Herodotus' version, it's somewhere in the middle. But this is an example of the Bible being a good history book. Moving on in 700 BC, and remember this map is approximately 700 BC. Once again, Marduk-Baladan is rebelling in Babylon. They haven't caught him in his previous 2 rebellions. Sennacherib, knowing trouble's on the rise, he recalls his puppet, remember the Babylonian child who he had raised and then installed on the throne. He recalls this puppet, and he sends his army down after the Chaldeans once again. And the Chaldeans, this time, they escape across the Persian Gulf, right here, to Elam. Sennacherib, thinking, okay, got to put more of an iron fist in charge, now that the Chaldeans have left Babylon, he can install his people again. He installs his own son, Ashur-nadashumi, on the Babylonian throne. Back to the general timeline in case we're losing the plot. Remember, this is 700 BC. I misspoke earlier. This map was approximately 900 BC. This map's 700 BC. And the overall timeline again. All right. I'm about to get long-winded.
You're just now starting to get long-winded?
Yes. And if I'm losing anyone, please just make me stop. In 694 BC, Sennacherib launches an expedition to get after those pesky Chaldeans in Elam. He also, of course, is just going to generally raid around Elam because, never let a good war go to waste. Sennacherib's going to make some money. So he launches an expedition to Elam to raid and wipe out any Chaldean refugees that are settled there. Marduk-Baladan actually dies while the Assyrians are on their way, which you gotta imagine really grinded Sennacherib's gears. He's out here trying to, wipe this people out, and his main baddie dies of natural causes. It's gotta be frustrating. While the Assyrian army is plundering Elam and attempting to eradicate any surviving Chaldeans, the Elamite king, combined with the surviving Chaldean soldiers that haven't been rooted out yet by the Assyrian army, he folds those Chaldeans into his army, and then the Elamite Chaldean army marches to Babylon, of course. After taking the city again, the Elamites and Chaldeans execute Ashur-nadashumi and installed a native Babylonian. The Assyrian Babylonian, a native Babylonian.
An actual native Babylonian.
The Assyrians returned and captured the new king of Babylon, and you can imagine what happened to them after they killed his son. What happened to the king of Babylon after they killed the Assyrian king's son. And then an Elamite revolt forces that army to return home, and bad weather stops Sennacherib from chasing them down. So they retake Babylon and basically agree to disagree with the Elamites for now. In 691 BC, Babylon's new king once again revolts, and Sennacherib once again takes his army south. In 690, Assyria lays siege to Babylon, and in 689 BC, after over a year-long siege, and weary of the constant rebellions and unhappy about them killing his son, Sennacherib levels Babylon after a 15-month siege. Again, we've got a record here of, they always write it as if the Assyrian leader said it. So does somebody want to read what Sennacherib had to say about what he did to Babylon?
I'll do it. All right. Into my land I carried off alive
Muzazib Marduk.
Thank you. King of Babylonia, together with his family and officials. I counted out the wealth of that city, silver, gold, precious stones, property, and goods, into the hands of my people, and they took it as their own. The hands of my people laid hold of the gods dwelling there and smashed them, and they took their property and goods. I destroyed the city and its houses, from foundation to parapet. I devastated and burned them. I razed the brick and earthenwork of the outer and inner walls of the city, of the temples, and of the ziggurat. and I dumped these into the Arhut Canal. I dug canals through the midst of that city. I overwhelmed it with water. I made its very foundations disappear, and I destroyed it more completely than a devastating flood, so that it might be impossible in future days to recognize the site of that city and its temples. I utterly dissolved it with water and made it like inundated land.
Okay.
Serious.
So, when I said that Sennacherib leveled Babylon,
Wow.
I meant water leveled, because he made a new river. Dan Carlin in the podcast episode, for those who didn't listen, he makes the point. Babylon was destroyed as thoroughly as if a nuclear bomb had been dropped on it, with Iron Age technology.
Sounds serious.
Sennacherib also brought the chief idol, Marduk. Remember, I said Marduk is the god of Babylon, but also the people are going to be named Marduk. The Babylonians, including in the book of Daniel, like to name people after their gods, like Hispanics and Jesus. But they brought their chief idol, Marduk, back to Assyria, where Marduk was also considered a major deity, just below the chief god of Assyria, Ashur. They staged a trial where they had the Ashur idol put the Marduk idol on trial. And of course, the Marduk idol lost. He was found not worthy in the eyes of Ashur. And following this, in an attempt to wipe out Babylonian culture and replace it with their own, after proving that Marduk was a bad god and not as good as Ashur, Sennacherib declared any ceremony or anything celebration involving Marduk would now just be replaced with Ashur instead of Marduk, because Ashur's god was better than their god. In 687 BC, I'm going to go back to the timeline here. In 687 BC, and we're going to go to 2 Kings 21, verses 1 through 9, and then someone else, if you would, please go to 2 Chronicles 33.
I'll read 21, 1 through 9.
Okay.
Manasseh was 12 years old when he began to reign, and reigned 50 and 5 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Hephzibah. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, after the abomination of the heathen, whom the Lord cast out before the children of Israel. For he built up again the high places which Hezekiah his father had destroyed, and he reared up altars from Baal, and made a grove, as did Ahab king of Israel, and worshipped all of the host of heaven, and served them. And he built altars in the house of the Lord, of which the Lord said, in Jerusalem will I put my name. And he built altars for all the host of heaven in the two courts of the house of the Lord. And he made his son pass through the fire, and observed times, and used enchantments, and dealt with familiar spirits and wizards. He wrought much wickedness in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger. And he set a graven image of the grove which he had made in the house, of which the Lord said to David and to Solomon his son, in this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, will I put my name forever. Neither will I make the feet of Israel move any more out of the land which I gave their fathers, only if they will observe to do according to all that I have commanded them, and according to all the law that my servant Moses commanded them. And they hearkened not, and Manasseh seduced them to do more evil than did the nations whom the Lord destroyed before the children of Israel.
Okay, thank you. And then if someone else could read 2 Chronicles 33, verses 1 through 10. It's a similar recounting, but this gets into my point I was making at the beginning of the Old Testament specifically is not chronological, it's circular. And then the verse after this, I'm going to have David read, and once again, you'll see how everything's out of order. But first, if we can do 2 Chronicles 33, verses 1 through 10.
1 through 10. Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. But he did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord had cast out before the children of Israel. For he rebuilt the high places which Hezekiah his father had broken down. He raised up altars for the Baals and made wooden images, and he worshipped all the host of heaven and served them. He also built altars in the house of the Lord, which the Lord had said, "In Jerusalem shall my name be forever." And he built altars for all the host of heaven in the two courts of the house of the Lord. He also caused his sons to pass through the fire in the valley of the son of Hinnom. He practiced soothsaying, used witchcraft and sorcery, and consulted mediums and spiritists. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger. He even set a carved image, the idol of which he made in the house of God, of which God had said to David and to Solomon his son, "In this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever, and I will not again remove the foot of Israel from the land which I have appointed for your fathers, only if they are careful to do all that I have commanded them according to the whole law and the statutes and the ordinances by the hand of Moses." So Manasseh seduced Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to do more evil than the nations whom the Lord had destroyed before the children of Israel.
Okay. So thank you both for reading. So
Almost the same thing.
almost the
Yeah.
same thing. Here's the interesting thing, because a lot of times we read something almost the same thing, and we know that these books weren't written as in real time. They were written after the fact. This is widely known. You would almost think they had the same source text, but that's not even the case, because the two books reference each other all the time. In fact, in Kings it says all the time, "Oh, but the rest is written in Chronicles," and in Chronicles it says all the time, "And the rest is written in the Book of the Kings." So, not even the same source material, because they're clearly both aware of each other and both saying you got to read them both to get the whole story. So again, the circular nature of how the Old Testament is written. I am going to read 2 Kings 21, verses 10 through 15. Basically, it's clear here that Manasseh, who has succeeded his father Hezekiah, is an idolater, clearly. And so a message is given to Manasseh, likely by the prophet Isaiah. Likely gives this. It doesn't name who's given it, but we know which prophets were active at that time. So it was likely Isaiah that gave this. And when it says, "And the Lord spake by his servants," the prophet saying, "Because Manasseh, king of Judah, hath done these abominations."
11.
And yeah, so, sorry, 2 Kings 21:11. Because Manasseh, king of Judah, hath done these abominations, and hath done wickedly above all that the Amorites did, which were before him, and hath made Judah also to sin with his idols. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, Behold, I am bringing such evil upon Jerusalem and Judah, that whosoever heareth of it, both his ears shall tingle. And I will stretch over Jerusalem the line of Samaria, and the plummet of the house of Ahab. And I will wipe Jerusalem as a man wipeth a dish, wiping it and turning it upside down. And I will forsake the remnant of mine inheritance, and deliver them into the hand of their enemies, and they shall become a prey and a spoil to all their enemies, because they have done that which was evil in my sight, and have provoked me to anger since the day their fathers came forth out of Egypt, even unto this day. Now remember,
God's chosen people.
when Sargon II was at the gates of Jerusalem, God spoke of a remnant. Now the remnant's getting delivered into the hands of their enemies. Just remember that.
That's because of idol worship, right?
Because of idol worship.
Yeah, he said, don't do that again. Because they had
And
done
they
it
did it
once.
again. So, now, David, I'm going to have you read one more part. That was 687 BC when Manasseh took over, and we're rolling that prophecy into approximately 687 BC, even though Manasseh was 12, and the prophecy probably came a little bit later. But the Bible doesn't give dates. We have to use historical records for that, and no one else in the Middle East who kept records cared about when Isaiah had something to say to Manasseh of Judah. So we're going with 687. But in 681 BC, I'm going to have you go back to 2 Kings 19 and read that last verse that I cut you off from. Because I wanted to make the point that things are not happening in order in the Bible. Again, it's a bad history book.
334 was he? Where'd he go?
2 Kings 19, verse 37.
And it came to pass, as he was worshiping in the house of Nisroch his god, that Dramelech and Sharezer his sons smote him with the sword, and they escaped into the land of Armenia, and Azaradan his son reigned in his stead.
So, Sennacherib's army, I misspoke a moment ago, I said Sargon II. Sennacherib's army is consumed by rats, the angel of God, 185,000. He goes home, and sometime later, his sons kill him. Like I said, the Assyrians kept good records. It was 681 BC when his sons killed him. They cooked up this great plot where all three of them killed him together, and then the oldest brother turned around and said, I'm killing y'all next! And they left, and Esarhaddon took over.
Family.
These Assyrians are brutal.
Yes.
Golly, they just kill the women with whatever they want.
Well, we haven't got to Ashurbanipal yet. He's known as the mean one.
So was a lot of this back and forth with the rulers over money or just
Money, power, slaves, I mean, you name it.
Bloodthirsty.
And people didn't think that was a bad idea to kill
No, not at all. Well, they all think that they're appointed by God and what have you. But moving on now to 680 BC, Esarhaddon begins rebuilding Babylon. So he kills his dad and then starts rebuilding the city his dad put a river over. He returns Marduk the idol to Babylon, and he resettles the Chaldeans in Babylon in 680. Esarhaddon does this.
That little statement you just said, sorry, I want to, a while back, I did some sort of study that veered into this, and they're saying that there's evidence that proves that he literally relocated the river. Literally relocated the river so that it would flow through where the town once stood.
Oh yeah, that's what Sennacherib did. I mean, he says he dug canals through the city. So first he says he tore everything out of their temples and dumped it in the canal that was there. Then dug new canals to flood the city. So he disrespected it, then covered it up. But Esarhaddon clearly didn't see eye to eye with his father and rebuilds the city and resettles the Chaldeans.
Do you want more? You want more coffee?
Yes, please. In 673 BC, Assyria tries and fails miserably to invade Egypt. And in 671, that stubborn old Esarhaddon, who built a city that had been destroyed 20 years ago, in 671, after failing to invade Egypt in 673, Esarhaddon tries again, and this time he is successful. When he captures Egypt, he captures the royal family. He brings the children of the royal family and the wives of the royal family back to the Assyrian court, where he will raise them, not their father, the Pharaoh. And he resettles, remember what resettling means. He resettles many Egyptians in the Assyrian heartland, and he moves his Assyrian people into Egypt. Another thing that I want to point out when we're bringing up again this resettling and the taking of children, this is something Russia did in Ukraine in the first few weeks of the invasion. They were basically killing the men, marrying the women to their soldiers because their husbands were just killed, and adopting the children out to families in Russia. Okay, that's not a new thing. It's a terrible, evil, horrible thing, and we can see it happen on the internet. But it's been going on since the beginning of time. And when we're talking about resettling, people resettling Egyptians in the Assyrian heartland, that's what we're talking about. In 669 BC, the defeat... Did you have a question?
No, I'm just trying to put it in time context. 669.
Yes. So 60... It was messing me up when I made this timeline because the numbers get smaller, not bigger as you go. But we're getting there. I promise y'all. I've been long-winded, but we are getting there. In 669 BC, the defeated Egyptian pharaoh returns from the exile that he had escaped into. Esarhaddon dies of natural causes while he's on his way to put down this new Egyptian rebellion. And Ashurbanipal, known for his great temper, ascends the throne. On his way to Egypt, Ashurbanipal collects tribute and soldiers from Manasseh in Judah. I'm going to read 2 Chronicles 33, verses 11 and 12. Verses 11 and 12, 2 Chronicles 33. Wherefore the Lord brought upon them the captains of the host of the king of Assyria, which took Manasseh among the thorns, and bound him with fetters, and carried him to Babylon. And when he was in affliction, he besought the Lord his God, and humbled himself greatly before the God of his fathers. So Manasseh, the Assyrians come to collect tribute. Manasseh is briefly detained by the Assyrians, and he repents from idolatry around this time. Side note here, no other Assyrian or Jewish record mentions Manasseh's captivity other than these two verses. So back to the Bible doesn't give timelines. It's a guess that this is when he was taken into Assyrian captivity in 669 BC, while Esarhaddon and then Ashurbanipal are on the way to Egypt. The reason for the guess, Assyrian records don't mention Manasseh anywhere else. This is the only other time after Manasseh comes to the throne that we know of the Assyrian king having an interaction with Manasseh. So I think it was 669 BC. Prove me wrong. Deal with it. You want to put on the presentation, you get up here.
Sounds good.
Ashurbanipal makes it to Egypt. He puts down the rebellion, and the pharaoh escapes once again to Nubia, which is down here.
Nubia. Yep.
So 664, Assyria has effectively completed its conquest of Egypt. When they capture Egypt, the Assyrian army, Ashurbanipal, makes his debut by sacking and heavily plundering the incredibly culturally significant city of Thebes. Thebes was the political and economic center of Egypt. So to wipe that out is not destroying or uprooting the culture per se of Egypt, but it is wiping them out as a political entity to sack Thebes. Ashurbanipal then installs Psamtik, who as the new pharaoh, gradually over time, he's a staunch ally of the Assyrians, and does gradually over time prove to be loyal enough to the Assyrians that the Assyrians give the Egyptians more and more autonomy on the condition that Psamtik is a solid dude, good pals with Ashurbanipal. In 665 BC, Elam, remember Elam. Elam tries to take Babylon and fails. Shortly thereafter, the throne of Elam is usurped by Tomin and the sons of the old king Urtok, who had just tried to take Babylon, are taken in by Ashurbanipal's court. So Urtok fails to take Babylon because Urtok can't get the job done. Tomin usurps the throne, and Ashurbanipal, in a rare good mood, says, "You know what? I know your dad just tried to take Babylon, but Urtak, your kids can come live with me." 653 BC, Elam once again attacks Babylon. Ashurbanipal's brother, who had actually been installed as the Babylonian king, remember I said they would try at various times throughout the Assyrian Empire to have him be the king of Assyria and Babylon, or the emperor of Assyria with the different king of Babylon. In 653